So first of all, just to get us started, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and then what we'll do is we'll let each of them tell you a little bit about what they're doing, what their experiences are in terms of open textbooks or in terms of traditional, whichever approach they want to approach this from, and then we'll get into some more specific questions as we go from there. So we'll start with Marlene on the end.
Marlene Naquin. I teach math and mathematics education on the coast. I received one of the proposals in January, February, to actually do an open access book. I'm actually starting from scratch. I teach a course for technology for secondary math teachers, teaching on the coast, but I've it to Hattiesburg. So it's still in structure. I was hoping to have it on Aquila by August. That was grand hopes. I have a really awesome counterpart from the library on the coast, Adrienne McFall, and she and I have been trying to plan. This last semester's got crazy. I'm hoping to have it in by beginning mid-spring, at least my rough draft. But it's been neat to work on. I'm enjoying doing it because textbooks have gotten expensive.
I'm Amanda Williams. I'm in Child and Family Studies. And the class that I'm focusing on is our Adolescents and Families class. And since I started, we've been through two very expensive textbooks that students don't read or don't buy or just generally hate, and they're not very engaging to read. So I also received a proposal through, I believe it's the Hewlett Foundation, through Ole Miss, to create my own free textbook. It also is in progress, but it has to be finished by January because I'm teaching the class and we did not order a book. So it will be finished.
Hi, I'm Marissa McGillis. I'm a senior communication studies major, and I serve as the executive director of student initiatives for the Student Government Association. So I'm here just kind of to provide a student perspective on textbooks. I haven't actually had a class where I've used an open access textbook, but from a traditional textbook perspective, I would say the largest issue that students face is obviously the cost. So in my major, communication studies, I spend roughly $200 to $300 per semester on textbooks, I would say, and I've always been one to purchase the textbook that is listed for the course, but obviously that's a large financial burden, and I know that students in other departments that I've spoken with usually spend even more than that. I would say the liberal arts are more on the lower end compared to the hard sciences. So definitely financial burden is an issue, so I'm excited to kind of learn about this new open access textbook initiative.
I'm Mike Vera. I teach physics. I've taught a graduate computational physics course. Has been out of a book I made from scratch for one of our introductory courses that only requires algebra. I've been using an OpenStax book for a few years now. I've recently gotten everybody in the department to agree to use it, and we're in the process of switching over the calculus-based introductory course to an OpenStax book, well, open access book. I'm going to be advocating for the OpenStax version, but that's another story.
Do you want to go ahead?
Okay, so real quick, just sort of a way to frame this. If you're here, obviously you have an interest in the possibility of using open resources, and one place, it sounds like I'm shilling for them, but it's just because I've been happy with their stuff. It's the place I've experience with is the OpenStax collection. This is run out of Rice through a Gates Foundation grant. And first thing to notice, and one thing you ought to be aware of if you're considering making this switch, is you have to know something about licensing status. You see down here, they say that everything they use is under a Creative Commons license, and that's sort of the basic thing you're going to get for open resources. But you've got to watch the qualifiers here. This one just says attribution, which is fine. You have to say where you got it from. Well, we should do that anyway. Another qualifier that doesn't really concern you too much is share alike, which just means that any derivative stuff you make out of their stuff, you have to also make freely available to use. It doesn't bother you. You got to be a little careful if it says non-commercial, because then you could run into issues about having the copy center make hard copies and have students buy it. It's not clear if that's legitimate or not. So there will be qualifiers there. Attribution and share alike are fine. You might be concerned if it's non-commercial. But you may be lucky enough that they've got a book that covers your exact target. and it's worth looking at. The other possibility, you might have to cobble something together out of other available resources. So, well, here, before we leave here, I have used this book right here for a few years now, and all you have to do, download a PDF of it. If you're happy with it, distribute it to the students, you're done. If they want a hard copy, and some students have expressed that they like that, you can tell them to, in my discipline, different textbooks don't make all that much difference. So you can tell them to buy an older edition of a credible textbook just for reading purposes, and those are insanely cheap. It's only current editions that are still being printed that are ridiculously expensive. You said $200 or $300 a semester, we got $200 or $300 a quarter. So we're out of this game, we're done. Anyway, I've been using this one for years, but at least when I got started on switching the calculus-based version of the course, there wasn't such a solution. So this one is my Frankenbook, cobbled together with pieces from various places, all of which are licensed, and the licenses are duly noted by notaries and signed and all legal junk. So that's another option. And then finally, the position that we've both been in, and I've been in once, and don't intend for it to happen again, where you had to really build it from scratch. But that is another option if you really can't even find substantial pieces of what you want. And then, of course, going electronic, there are lots of other widgets and so forth I've made that, if you're interested, I can show you. But that's sort of the lay of the land. Yeah?
So just to kind of get the conversation started, can each of you, or whoever wants to take the question, can you tell us a little about what got you interested in the concept of open textbooks and what really started getting you, I guess, moving down that road?
I can start that. So I mentioned I'm teaching an adolescents and families course, and there, I inherited a book when I started. We switched to a different book, and they just cover everything you could possibly ever want to know about adolescent development, which is not what our class is. That kind of steps on the toes of adolescent psychology, which is another class offered in our college. That's an awkward situation to teach the same thing. We're supposed to be coming from this relational family perspective, community perspective. So we would kind of cherry pick from the book, and then students don't really like paying $142 for a book that they use 30% of. So I proposed, and plus I teach a families and technology course, so just sitting there reading, the whole idea of digital natives, where they get their information in a different way than just opening a book. I was really excited at thinking about my entire class from a different perspective, not that we have this book, and I have this PowerPoint, and then there's me, and then there's my class, as all these separate pieces, really trying to integrate it together. So I created a website that is the book, and there are some existing open resources for adolescents. They're very minimal. It kind of surprises me what can pass as a textbook. It's kind of like the first paragraph of Wikipedia, you know what I mean, about everything you need to know. So I did pull in some of that. But what was great is I was able to tailor the class to exactly what we want to cover. I pulled in the text. Some of it I wrote or had graduate assistants write, like little lit reviews on different topics that they get credit for. I built videos directly into the book, quizzes directly into the book, different things. So it's a living thing that we can use in class. I actually pull it up on my phone. I can sit here and read my book and take the quiz and do all these things. And so we're constantly tacking back and forth between the book, the discussion, any mini lecture that I want to have. And it gives, and the other faculty that teach it with me get input as well. We can change things as we need to because it's a free website that we just log in and change. So it really feels like a living, breathing part of the class, which is very exciting. It's a ton of work. In fact, I just noticed that my great website, my homepage is now a sandwich. So clearly they've changed some of the images. That stresses me out. So I'm going to have to obviously go look at that a little closer. And things like I got an email that the website host that I used was hacked in February. And you have to think about these things when you're asking students to access stuff online. But I think that the benefits outweigh with risks with open source stuff.
What I found, I mainly teach math courses for those who are going to be teachers, either elementary math or secondary ed math. And what we found is we could have a book, and then we really liked it, and then they weren't publishing the 6th edition, we had to go to the 7th edition. I would have no problem if they kept the 6th edition, because there's 2 + 2 is 4 in base 10 always. But they kept, the prices kept going up. Now for us, they might, in elementary ed, they'll use the course, the book for more than one course. So it's not as expensive, quote unquote. And then, we have an online, the math homework stuff like they use for many of our courses. But there also was other things, and with so many new things like teaching them online, manipulatives, some were built into the book, but I was always having to find something extra. In our educational unit, we took out a component a test they took to get into the education component, the BTLE. So everybody had to incorporate some other new technology course. We created our own. And so with that, we're using a lot of free stuff. I always tell my students, I'm going to use the alphabet class as a 4-letter one, get used to it, free, and I'm going to use it a lot. So we use a lot of things that they can actually take with them when they're teaching. Google, Microsoft Now, GeoGebra instead of Sketchpad cost, GeoGebra's free. There's all kind of, out of the University of Colorado, it's a lot of physics. I keep thinking of the name of it, it's out of my head. A lot of simulation stuff. So we were always doing that, kind of incorporating that. And I found I was putting a lot of stuff on Blackboard or handing them out pages. Like, well, why didn't I do that? My goal had always been, I taught high school for 20-something years before I came to Southern Miss, was create my own workbook. And then I could just kind of always, they could print out if they wanted, they could just work online. So it's like, that's what my goal was, to start that. Well, now, I've just kind of developed with using this, because we are doing it. And now, we taught it last semester, was the first time it was offered. I inherited it because the person who had helped us create it in my department actually moved. So like, okay, well, here you go, here's the thing. So built upon it. My students are giving me lots of ideas too, which is what I like about putting it on Aquila versus, if I just publish it myself, is that they're also going to integrate it. They can also help out. They can add to it. It's going to be something they can always resource back later. But it's been a challenge. I applied for the proposal last fall. We actually found out in January whether we had it. Spring, which is, it's spring. It's best if you teach in spring. I teach full-time in the summer. It's just bananas, so it's kind of getting crazy. So I'm trying to do it. This semester I'm teaching again, so it's kind of like in a draft form right now. And what we're also trying to do, because the math books have gotten so expensive, there's the calculus ones in OpenStack, there's other ones. We're also trying to go, instead of from Pearson and Wiley homework, we're also going to WebWorks for a lot of our courses, which is through MAA, where you can actually create your own problem sets and do that. You can use it with OpenStacks or things. A lot of OpenStacks books actually have WebWorks. So this will be something we can incorporate in our own books after this. We won't have to buy a published homework lesson. It works the same way. We'll create them. So as I'm doing this, I could actually, one thing that actually shows them is how to create your own problem sets, how to do that. We're doing voice chat. We talked about Emoto yesterday. We're doing active whiteboards. It's all something I can incorporate with this course. And then right now it's focused for math, technology and math, but most of what we're doing could be any course. Not just for teaching. There'll be some things that'll be in it that you'll be able to use in your child and family studies class. Mike could use in physics, and even the College of Arts and Letters could use it.
Even then.
I just think they're some of my favorite people, but we tease them. So it's been interesting. It's been a challenge, though. I guess that's always been one of my goals, is to do that. I teach full-time. I'm an instructor. I don't have the research component. Mike and I was talking about doing that balance, but it is a challenge. But it's fun. The expenses have gotten really, our calculus, we use the book for courses if they get in our Cal 1 series. It's gotten major expensive. And if you can't get the old book, what are you going to do? Some students want the hard copy.
It's always the headline advantage for students, but it wasn't until I'd done it for a while that I realized they appreciated not lugging that brick around. And then some of them started getting really good at electronic searches, or they were looking for this, like there. So there's some hidden student advantages as well, but I think it's easy to forget there's another advantage to us. Publishers, in order to support the price, have to keep coming up with new editions in order to squelch the used market, that also has the disadvantage for us that any specific reference to the text can become outdated. What was driving me crazy is I find a problem that I thought perfectly figured out when they understood this one idea. And that problem could at any time evaporate or move or, so there are advantages to us to being able to make it static unless we decide to change it. So that's another advantage that a lot of people who get started in this process have really thought of, and it is a substantial one. I never have to worry about an edition changing under my feet again.
Now, just a disadvantage, just, you know, I always got to play devil's advocate because I do with my students, is that because it's, you know, web-based, and if they don't, you know, they can print out a PDF, they can print out pages, but instructors have to be comfortable with students having their tablet or their laptop in class. I have no problem, you know, you can do, because I actually teach them to use resources on their smartphone. If you're not paying attention because you have this out, you probably weren't paying attention if you had your book out. That's my humble opinion after having taught junior high to high school and even all ages here. So, but that's one thing some people don't like. In some of our classrooms, they have to make sure they're, you know, everything's charged because, you know, we're not set up where everybody can plug in, you know, like here, you couldn't all plug in. So that's one disadvantage. But an advantage of us publishing them or doing OpenStack is they can print a PDF. So you could say,
Well, yeah, I mean,
print so many pages.
that's still, the price can get out of control.
But if they want it, you know,
If
they
wanted
could.
it.
If somebody doesn't, you know, they can read
I
it.
encourage them to just go buy an old
Mhm.
edition of a standard text, and if you really want to sit with a dead tree version in your lap, go buy a $7 3 editions back of a standard text, and just use my electronic one for problem number references. When I say problem 37, I mean 37 inches. And so even that can be overcome, students who are much more comfortable with paper in their lap. If you do OpenStack specifically, they'll sell you a paper edition, but that's obviously a snapshot of where it was at some time. So you lose some of the advantage of it being static, except for changes that you're aware of. It's a possibility. And their huge printout for the college physics book was $50-something. So far more reasonable. Not 300 like some of the intro texts have become.
And also, I think one thing too, is that when you make them interactive, especially, you can also put hyperlinks. So you can go to something, like I can click and we can go directly to another website. Where if they have the print version, which a lot of our math books are going to that you know, they're online, but even in the print version, you can click and there's a URC code, and click it and it goes right to a video where we can actually build this into an open access book. And as you renew it, if the hyperlink changes or something on Creative Commons changes, if you embed it, things like that, there's some things you can always go back to, go by the hyperlink, which is a big advantage because you can do some live things. You can include videos this way.
In my class, I'm planning to even have guest speakers inside our book, which is
Cool.
pretty neat, you know, through Google Hangout and YouTube and different things. So, and then it will archive, obviously, for the future, but it could be live, you know, with Facebook Live and different things like that. You can stream within your book. I'm currently in an open class with Stanford's open course, and it's a poverty and income inequality course, and that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, the text is minimal. It's a lot of videos, links, stats. There is some reading, but that's not the anchor. The anchor is actually engaging, some finding information rather than just passively having words thrown at you. It's really good.
Well, I want to bring the audience into the conversation too, so that's your cue to be thinking about your questions that you're going to have for the panel. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask Marissa real quick. In talking with students and your experience, how much awareness do you sense from students about the concept of open textbooks? Is that something that they're all that familiar with? What's your perception there?
I've talked to a couple students who said they have used it in their classes, but the majority of students had basically no idea what I was talking about. So unless I talked with a large group of student government students and then also some students, some tour guides. And so those are students who are pretty engaged on campus as far as knowing what's going on. And like I said, only a few of them had said, oh yeah, I've used that in my class. They sort of knew what I was talking about. But then pretty much everybody else just was like, oh, that sounds really cool, but I've never used anything like that. But definitely, from everything you guys have said, I think it's just something students would love to have, because another huge frustration I think students have with textbooks, aside from the financial burden, is just that there's not very much accountability for reading the textbook, other than sometimes professors will have, quizzes and things as you go along. But when you're not using the textbook in class, which traditionally, I guess they're called traditional textbooks, aren't really used throughout the lecture. So a lot of times when I am reading the textbook, I feel like there's not really any sense of accountability for doing that. So even though it's somewhat beneficial to have that background knowledge, if you're not actively engaging with it, it sometimes seems like there's no advantage for me spending this money on the textbooks as opposed to students who just choose not to purchase them.
Well, I've got some other questions I can ask, but before I do that, I want to see, any of you guys have any questions that you want to throw out at this point?
Somebody ask something?
Not all at once now.
I think everybody has said, you use open access books, right?
I will indeed.
You will be.
Yeah, we use mine, yeah.
So if you've been using them for a couple of years or longer, have you noticed students choosing your class because of that?
Well, it's only been very recently that we switched over, and when I was the only one, my timing was off. So it wouldn't have been a matter of somebody picking my section as opposed to somebody else. I was teaching the first semester in spring and the second semester in fall. So if that was the position you were in, you were stuck with me. And here now, we're all going to be using it in the same way. So we're going to make changes collaboratively and log them. So for the introductory courses, there's not really going to be any choice.
And we have to use the same textbook in math ed, so, and I'm the person who teaches online sections, but even like the ones when I teach a lecture course in-house, I do find, I allow them to have the online version, the e-text. And I'm finding, I'm having more and more choosing to do the e-text. And now that the bookstore does a lot more rental, or you can even rent the online for, if we know we're just going to do chapters 5, 12, and 6, they can actually rent just those pages. So I do find that most of my students are starting to go with just the online version. Because if you're in my online class, I have no idea whether you have the textbook or not. Because the online homework actually links you as you're doing it. So, but I do find mine are, I'm not saying they pick my classes because of that, because of I'm the only one that teaches stuff on the coast, so there's really no option. You have me, and I'm the only one that does it online. So it's me or no one. So.
We don't really have data about student selection, so we don't have data that way, but I have collected a couple of years worth of data of student evaluations of the textbook. And I asked some things above and beyond the regular student evaluation sheet, and they rated the online book as a 7.5 out of 10, which, as a student evaluation of the textbook, that is very, very strong. Normally students are a little more critical. He said, Chair.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages, calling out one of the major disadvantages being that some students just prefer the paper book, right? Last time I was at one of these panels, it turned into a panel about everything that's wrong with tenure, because they were discussing publishing articles in the repository versus like New England Journal of Medicine, and they lose, I don't know, 40 tenure cookies. I don't know how tenure works. I'm not tenure.
That's better.
So does anything like that that's outside of how it affects you and your students in the classroom, but outside in your professional, is there concerns that you think about like tenure when you're thinking about publishing as a disadvantage in the repository?
Well, I mean, these are instructional materials, so that's not really,
So it doesn't
I
weigh
mean,
in.
if you were to look into publishing, it would be as an instructional thing. And sure, if you were to create an original text and publish it through a traditional publisher, that would rate on, you know, the educational part of evaluating you. There's a clean enough split between research content and instructional content that the issue you're bringing up is much more likely to be a concern if you have research content. Oh, I need this to be published. And for me, it would be the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America in order to get my tenure cookies. But that doesn't come up with this material where I'm worried about.
So not really a barrier in this specific.
I would see it as an advantage because, you know, when you start looking down the road going up for full, you know, national recognition is a thing. And there's a great structural equation modeling professor who is known by every student because he turns his lessons into songs and they're on YouTube. So, I mean, he's known for that. So in terms of trying to be known for something, if you're putting your name on something you've crafted, and you can, if it's your research area, which usually it is if we're teaching that class, then you cite and provide the permalink for your students, which they can log in through the library. I think you're only doing yourself a favor in terms of your expertise.
Now, coming from a person who's not tenure track, I know, I think our department is starting to look at that. You know, if I published a book chapter or a book, even, you know, for education, and I had it published by Springer or Pearson, at some point that might have given me more quote-unquote points, whatever, versus publishing it, and not, some people would say just on Aquila. But I think that's going to change soon, yeah, because looking at what the open access and the uses of it are and incorporating, you know, different things. But I agree with you. I think for some people that does make a difference. Coming from outside looking in, I always try to fight for my tenure track pals because I like them, I don't want them to stay. Is that matter, you know, working on something and having to have the research. But I think that's going to probably have to change. The more our university is trying to go to the open access. And, you know, Dr. Dine, we're on the textbook committee, and there's this whole thing about having to buy it versus being open access. So that's probably going to change. And again, it's based research versus educational. For my group, the math education people, it's kind of the same thing. When you do your research, it's instructional materials.
And maybe with some of that is that some open educational textbooks aren't peer reviewed. But like everything on OpenStack since 2012 is all peer-reviewed textbooks. So that may hold a little more weight in the tenure cookie area.
That's certainly something, I know somebody who's a reviewer of one, and that's something they put on the evaluation form. It's, you know, one notch for them.
One question I wanted to ask you is, have you guys looked at, have you done a calculation on how much you save the students by, okay, going to the open textbook versus the traditional one thus far?
A very conservative estimate. I think I can comfortably say 30,000.
Wow.
3 years, 80 students, $100 book if they can find it. Somewhere in that ballpark. And then, again, I've done it for a graduate course as well in computation, which was my one experience with starting from scratch. But that's a much smaller course.
Yeah, if I had for the math technology course, there was no one book, they were just piecemeals, maybe like a chapter here, chapter there. And if I had them buy every book, probably would have been like $200, and it had just been good for that one course. So you're looking at, you know.
Times however many students take that course per semester, basically, yeah.
Just to throw out a dollar amount on some other stuff I was looking at, the college physics textbook from the bookstore new is $48.50. And you have 198 students currently enrolled this semester in all sections. So you're looking at just for this semester, if everybody were to buy a textbook, you're looking at $9,603.
Right, and that's
That's not even the extra
Well,
stuff.
that's, yeah, right, 111, and those guys have just now
Yeah.
switched. So now we have more people doing it. When I was the only one doing it, there were fewer students, but it was for a longer time.
Yeah, so even with just, I mean, that's
Yeah,
that's a huge number.
And this is the first semester of switching to calculus-based course over. The first 4 guinea pigs have to use my Franken book, but we're in the process of looking over their university physics book. Switch over to that. But also keep in mind, your $48 figure, most of them won't even spend that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't necessarily encourage them to do so. If they want a book, I can name 6 different introductory physics books.
Oh, yeah.
Buy any edition you want, post 1990.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, just to look, I mean, just for a figure of
Yeah.
how much
Right.
you're saving those students in that class, it's, I mean, that's not a small
Part of it
amount.
was, if you wanted a new, the old book we were using, if you wanted a new one of it, it was creeping up toward $300. And this is for an introductory class about physics, which nothing they're going to learn has changed since 1890.
And that's just like us going with WebWorks now for some of our courses in math. It's free. So, you know, a course was on, we bought a book that had the online homework, and they were just using that online homework for part of the course. That was, kind of wasteful money-wise. So now they would be saving, you think, like in math, elementary ed math, if we would use an open access book for that, they're probably $150 per semester. And it's $156 for the book. Now, they can use it for more than one, so let's say, but some take it at junior college, so they're coming in, like, we had the book in the summer, I switched to a new book this fall. Somebody who's in the first section, now in their second half of the course they paid $180 for the other book, $156 this semester. And like Pearson, it's the same homework thing, but you buy a different module for each course you take.
Well, and it's a ton of money that doesn't particularly go anywhere useful. The author's stake in the sale price of a book is not much. I had a biology professor who said, just so you don't think I'm, self-motivated and cheating you, after you take your final lineup, and I'm going to give you my cut of selling you your book back. And it was $3 a student.
Anybody else in the audience? Any questions? Or?
I want to know how hard it was to get your colleagues on board.
The easiest way was, and there is a requirement that coexisting, when they're the same course, different sections, and they coexist, by IHL policy, they're supposed to be the same text, which I'll let that go for now. But I wasn't teaching it at the same time. Because I was doing the offset section, the trailer section, when I was teaching 111, they were all teaching 112. When I was teaching 112, they were all teaching 111. So I was free to do whatever I wanted, switched over to college physics with some slight tweaks. And basically it was just showing them, everybody understood the advantages, but then when I was able to actually do it and just show them, the things you're worried that might go wrong just don't amount to much. And then they were, sure, great, I'm tired of, when I refer to the table or some particular graph, I don't have to keep refining what page number that is. So they were always happy with that possibility. When I showed them the concerns about, the students will never look at it, the students won't even download it, it just didn't amount to much. It wasn't hard at all.
The challenge that I've encountered, I shouldn't say the hesitancy to adopt this, is sometimes we get really comfortable having PowerPoints that come with the book, tests that come with the book. But I think you have to just be really honest that students are getting the quizzes through Quizlet or whatever. The PowerPoints have way too much text on them. And they're very, very boring. They're basically copy and paste from the book. And so that's not really reflecting you in the best light. So sometimes it's worth kind of ripping the Band-Aid off and rethinking something so that it will be better moving forward. I am nervous this spring. We are teaching both sections of the class. And so we're still using the same book we've always used, and then we're piloting this new approach. So hopefully, an hour and a half apart, the students will not, have any hard feelings about that. But, we'll see.
I've tried
I
this,
agree. All PowerPoints that weren't made by me have way too much text.
because it's not as much active learning too, so, because they're just reading. I've tried, my evaluations are probably they may plummet this semester, but I was willing to see. I've tried to make them quote unquote more reliable on the text for the textbook for online, because they do have some really neat videos built in, and then they ask me questions in chat. Just want them to see, because some of them think, I don't have to come to class because I have the book. So trying to get on board so I can actually have data for when I try to propose this for some other courses. We do have people in the upper level math courses who are very interested in using OpenStax or things like that. Because it changes,
You can
Because
keep
like the one, yeah.
up to date.
Yeah. Because you put a book in, or your book order was October 15th. By the time they order it for January, there could be a new edition. You can't get the old one.
For upper level, it's going to be tough to find specifically OpenStax, but they can come up with some. There are other avenues.
So is
This
that
is just
the-
the one I have a lot of experience in.
Would that be the advantage of Aquila then?
What's that?
Building something in Aquila for your open?
Sure, yeah. Mhm.
But you have to do it, you have to,
Well, it's kind of
Frankenstein it.
like you say, I mean, it's the front end is where the work is, right? I mean, it's that work of putting all this
Yes.
together. But once it's done, then you're just sort of tweaking and modifying as you go. It's not,
Well, and independent of the extent of the changes,
Yeah.
you made them. You had a reason for doing it, and you knew that it happened. You didn't have to go hunt it down.
Right.
And I guess what I'm doing is technically a Franken book, but I'm going to call it a carefully crafted piece of art, scientific art, or Franken book.
I'm trying to call mine.
I'm a physicist, I have no sense of nuance or.
I call mine an active learning experience
There
in
you go.
technology. And I do like it because with Aquila, one of the goals we spoke about with it is to be that you update it. So like when I have it ready, this course is only offered in the fall. Hopefully we offer it maybe more often as we grow our department and our program, or even other secondary programs take advantage of it because it can be adapted. Then as we adapt it on Aquila, I could adapt it for a biology course. I could adapt it for physics licensure. I could adapt it for history licensure because there's so many things that are
overlap.
yeah. So that's one advantage that we can just adapt it. Like I said, I'm doing the math ports and those stuff. I am relying on some friends of mine who are going to do the editing for grammar and other things like that.
So you foresee sharing with people across the world with the book?
Yeah. And even my friends who, it's Aquila, my friends who teach high school.
Yeah.
Prepare, and I have a friend who teaches at the other universities that maybe they can add to it.
Sure, that makes sense.
My students are excited. I have some who are like really pumped about this. They're like, oh, I have this idea, maybe we can add to it. Or when I'm teaching, I can send you stuff and say, hey, this worked, this didn't work.
And be aware that if you use some materials that have the share alike qualifier, you've already committed to that. That you
Right,
can make this
right.
available to anybody who wants
Sure.
it.
Do you have any ideas to solve this textbook problem? To make
Which
it
one?
To make it more sustainable. I mean, you've got, still the problem with the model is that you've got this front end obligation, this time that you have to invest on the front end. So isn't there a way, have you talked or thought about, or do you have ideas about somehow, I know a partial idea was, I know one university that tried building the textbook into the class, so the students sign up for the class, the textbook comes with it, and then they negotiate. That way the students aren't buying their own individual books, but the university can negotiate a better deal that way. But couldn't that idea be applied here where the students would have a fee, a much smaller fee than what the textbook costs now? That goes to the department, they use that to help offset some of the time, but the instructors are, wouldn't that be one
The issue
idea?
with some of that, at least what I've seen, is a obviously those kinds of agreements with a publisher have a lead time. You may or may not know who's going to be teaching the course, so you're committing an as yet unknown instructor to a text.
Yeah, for the publisher.
And for a term, right? They're not going to bother with that unless you agree to do it for 3 years, and then in
Right.
year 2, you say, this book is driving me crazy.
I mean, that's an example of a different model. I was just wondering if for the open access model, could you charge a fee?
A course fee to
Yeah,
pay
a
for
course
the
fee
work.
for $20 or $50, where the normal cost of a
Well,
textbook
right
is
now,
$300.
we've gotten involved with a grant program that, at least for me, covered a decent chunk of the summer that I was able to sit down and do it, so,
Right,
yeah.
but,
For the 3rd time. I didn't get
Yeah,
paid for
see,
the
mine,
first and the
yeah.
second.
yeah, but that, I guess I'm not sure where that kind of money, I mean, is that sustainable? I mean, the university could choose to do that, and that would be one way to do it, but I guess to me, I mean, another way would be like some kind of
Oh,
student fee.
for an open access, sure, absolutely. Yeah, no, that, I can see that.
Yeah, because mine was the one-time proposal, I got part of it, and I got to get the second part. But then I said maybe if we did something like that, like, you know, we have lab fees for our 099 and 101 and their lab fees for that. If we did that, then just an incentive, even if it's not much, I mean, just a few dollars, then that would allow the department to maybe give some incentives for faculty members to kind of, you know, to do that. I didn't get a course release, the money I got for doing this is very minimal amount of time I'm putting in, you know.
And that's going to be.
But for me, it's,
And that's going to be a deal breaker for a certain percentage.
it's a big deal breaker for
But
the
you can sell it saying, well, you know, in the long run,
Yeah.
this eventually makes your life easier.
And I think you can tell the institutions that have decided to go all in with that, because they've done, like, they have the libraries that you can access in each room, and they look great. So they've clearly invested in these, wanting to be that kind of resource on a national level, in terms of going, people are all gonna put course fees and things into that. I wish, since we're dreaming big about how to solve the problem, I wish we would quit thinking about textbooks as a book that covers all the things, and more about modules, kind of like Khan Academy, is more about topical modules, because, you know, science is messy, and things bleed over. Lots of us need to know about how children's brains develop, whether we want to give them therapy or do surgery on their heads, you know. So I wish we would go, and that's kind of how I've tried to do mine, is less of a front to end, this is the book, read it in this order, more module based, and then I, because I'm teaching it, have structured it the way I want. But it'd be very easy to change things around, you know.
Because mine is divided like for Unit 1, Unit 2. One is the productivity, how you actually prepare your lessons. And the second unit is how you actually present and how you get your students involved. But there's a number of things that, you know, we'll be doing that probably I could tie in with Mike and people in chemistry. And when I do the educational component, educational learning and thinking, and, you know, my students have to relate to families as their parents. So there'd be some really cool things I could do with my colleagues in child and family studies. You know, I have a BA in psychology, so I rely a lot on my, you know, I talk to my psychology peeps. And of course, you know, I need people who are going to edit for me. Yeah, but I'll say that a lot because I'm going to.
I'm a one-girl show, unfortunately.
So what are the possibilities for collaboration in Aquila? Like, I keep coming back to Aquila because I want to try it. I do my own modules anyway, every time I do my Blackboard class. I just don't save them anywhere, so then they get rid of them accidentally or on purpose from Blackboard. And then I have to, well, and I change it every time anyway.
So what do you teach?
I teach Spanish, but a lot of work with graduate students. I teach in our online graduate program. So, yeah, there's no book that ever has what I need in it. So
And the thing with that
decided-
too, the stuff you give your students on Blackboard, once they're on in the course.
It's gone,
unless
I
they
know.
download it,
So
they
now
can't
they all
do it.
make Weebly pages, so they're saving it themselves and sharing with each other on the Weebly.
And
page.
even if you do it on SharePoint with Microsoft, now is when they graduate, they no longer have access. All
Right.
they have access to is.
That's why we have
email and
Weebly.
calendar.
Yeah, because there's thousands of exercises and things they do in there that every time they get a new version.
So that's a, like, you collaborate, because there's
Yeah,
different
that's
things.
like
So
really interesting.
much
I
we
love
could
your
do
idea.
To show that the whole cross-curricular idea
Sure,
that we.
Yeah, exactly.
And even having graduate students create content for the
Mhm.
undergraduates is a great
Yeah,
learning experience for everyone.
right.
Basically, it's whatever one's put in Aquila. I mean, it's not just put up as one big file. It's
Right.
put in as the individual pieces, so to speak. So you could sort of pull a unit here, a unit there, kind of do that. Absolutely, we collaborate and do that sort of thing.
That is that's a low rent solution to things like Blackboard and that going away, is to just yourself package it into one gigantic file and have that be in a reference location, and
Right.
anybody can get it anytime they want.
Sure.
That's, leads to a big download. But,
Right, well, and who knows if I can, I'm a Mac person, so sometimes they just don't come back anyway. But I'm excited about this.
You could divide it by units or modules and say, this module is on families.
My original fear when I decided to try and do it, where I was going to make a very small number of huge files, is that they didn't need persistent online access. They had to sit down somewhere with internet access once, get it, you're done.
That's really cool.
But that's, I mean, it has ups and downs, and it depends on what you're
It's a
doing.
big
If
chunk
you
of
like
stuff. I like
sort of
videos
little
and
independent
pictures.
pieces, no, I see. I had one big PDF that was the book, one big PDF that's all the slides and homework questions, and then like an Excel sheet with interactive question stuff. You got those 3 files, you're done for the semester. Thank you very much.
Well, and I make them a syllabus that has live links to YouTube and all the different things that I've pulled in, so they could do it. I don't know if they figure out that they can.
So it's different strategy.
One of the things, going back to what Dr. I was saying a minute ago too, is that one thing that I would like to see is I would like to see at some point more of the advocacy toward the open textbook approach coming from students. I think that's something that if students are advocating for this and they're able to say to the administration, look, here's the burden that the traditional textbook puts on us, here's an alternative, that makes it more likely that we get that administrative buy-in and maybe there is support for a more sustainable model besides just those little grants here and there to try to get things started. And I think that's something that could have a lot of traction.
And outcomes, I think if you get a grant, you have to measure student learning outcomes, and if those do significantly improve,
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I can't argue.
John, saw a question back.
You see that with online classes. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been in meetings or in a group where people say all the bad things about online learning, but when students sign up for them and they're voting with their feet, how can you argue with that?
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, John, go ahead.
It's okay, John. So Marissa, is that right?
Yes.
Earlier you said, 1 or 2 students knew about it, but most people didn't know it. To me, that sounds like a really polite way of saying not a single student's ever heard of Aquila, ever. They don't even know it exists. So how do we solve that? Fix that for us. It's only it's a very simple question. I just need to know how. Or do the students even need to know for the rest of the panel? Is it up to instructors to get buy-in and that pulls the students in and we don't care until they're in a class that's using the online source?
So you want to know how I think that we can get the word out to students about it, basically, get their buy-in. Well, first of all, I guess it is possible that a few of these students, there were a few that said they've used them, but maybe they just didn't understand what an open textbook is. So there could be some confusion with just online textbooks versus open textbooks from the student perspective. So yeah, maybe it's possible that no one knows about them at all. I think definitely discussions about them from instructors would help. And I mean, like I said, I'm part of student government, so there's definitely promotions that we could do. But I guess I'm not sure exactly how student government could go about promoting that this is happening if there's not a lot of it happening yet so far. So, but I'm not totally clear on that, like how many instructors are actually using open access textbooks at this point. But I would certainly be happy to, like, you know, meet with anyone about sort of what is going on with it and see how we could find ways to better get the word out to students, because I definitely think it's something that students would really appreciate.
Is there a way to know how many are you?
Can I ask you, when did you know what Aquila meant? What was Aquila? When did you find out what Aquila?
My only knowledge of Aquila is because I'm in the Honors College, and I know that's where we where a thesis will be published, but other than that, I've just sort of picked up on it from your conversations just now that it's, other things are published on it as well.
That's how you,
So
that's where you
I don't
find
think that
everything.
students know what Aquila is unless they're in
That's-
the honors
that's-
college at all.
Even those do their basic research, I don't think some of them know that that's a place they can come.
So is that
and
something we need to pick up? Do students,
They don't
I mean,
know.
until they need the book, right? Is it something they ever need to know about?
Well,
How do we
that's
attack that?
separate from, I mean, they should be aware of how easy it is to get access to some resources electronically for research purposes. But that's sort of separate from using open resources in a class, because that may or may not be the delivery.
Right. So,
I throw ours up on the website, so.
right. I mean, I take a few classes that for me, the big selling point is $300 for this book or not. But I feel like I have no control over that, right? My professor's going to dictate that to me, and I have to make a decision from there.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Right. So it's not relevant, I guess, until they're in a class that's using.
or that they're at least aware
Yeah.
that this is a possibility. You might want to advocate for this.
Right, that you even have a say, that you can have a voice in that. I wouldn't imagine, when I was a student, I would never say, we want free books, we want them now, you know what I mean? I wouldn't have known that that was even an option, and I think.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an awareness of the problem, but I don't think there's that same awareness of the solution that's there.
Because that, you know, our textbook law, our textbook policy here, which came from IHO, actually comes from the Higher Educational Act. And that actually it promotes online open access, online textbooks to save students money. That was one of that's why they also say keeping the same book for 3 years. But if you had open access, then that whole thing, having to keep the same book for 3 years for 100, 200 level, if we taught the same courses, would kind of, you'd have more freedom in that to kind of change books when something new comes along or something like that. But I do think too, as you were saying, is just information getting out there. Because to be honestly, we have, not just students, we have faculty who are not aware of the opportunities for open access.
But that goes along with what you're doing, where you started one thing and now everybody's gonna do it, next semester.
So I did totally blow up.
Yeah. So once you started, the colleagues say, oh yeah, what are you doing there?
And I mean, you can sell it by saying that there's really advantages on both sides. Obviously, there's some student stuff, but to have, to be able to choose where you want the authority to cause changes. And I mean, if you want to do it department-wide and make sure that everybody sits down and says, yeah, we want to make the following changes, or if you just want, to appoint one change guy and everybody gripes to him and he makes the changes, you can do whatever you want, but the point is, it doesn't change unless you say so.
I had a conversation recently with some faculty in philosophy that are looking at putting together an open text for their department, because a lot of the
They asked me
readings
for my
that they...
proposal to
Oh, did they really?
How'd
Okay.
you structure?
Okay. So a lot of the readings that they use are out of copyright at this point, because they're from several hundred years ago. So all those materials could be made available freely to the students already if they just sort of packaged it that way. So I mean, I think there's some of that is like you're saying, it's just making even faculty aware of the opportunity that's there. I mean, that's something that's not a huge onerous thing for them to go and find these works and find an open, a public domain version that they could use for that class. It's just a matter of discovering, oh, this is something we can do.
And yeah, if your class fits any of these, whether or not you happen to like their particular presentation or whatever, crack it open, have a look, and see if that's something you can realistically think about.
We've got about 5 more minutes, so we've got time for 1, maybe 2 more questions, depending on, I guess, how quick they are. Anybody? All right, well, then I guess at that point, any parting thoughts from the panelists? Any thoughts going forward or ideas or
I just had a question a minute ago.
Okay.
is there a way to see like how many classes are you don't have a textbook? Because there's no, it's like you don't
You
say,
can't do
I'm
that.
creating a free
Yeah.
textbook, you just don't order a textbook
Yeah.
for the class.
I'm sure there is, because I think whenever they submit orders, they have to flag that in the
I
bookstore, there's
think
no
you can,
textbook for the
It says
course,
no
right?
textbook,
So,
you can pull it up.
yeah.
Well, right. There's
But
some
that doesn't
confusion
mean
though. They
it's
want
a
you
number.
to say you're using an online book, but I wasn't aware of that
Oh, I
the first
didn't know
time
that
I
either.
did. And so I just told them no textbook.
Right.
So
Mm.
faculty may not be clear on whether they're saying there's no textbook versus there's a free online textbook. So you may not put too much stock.
Right, we may have to, when we do textbook orders, there's, you put the book in, and then you put no textbook. You may have to actually say no textbook, or using, might have to add another button, but we use faculty like with Barnes and Nobles. Maybe there's a button we can add that says no textbook or open access
Well,
book.
somebody told me just recently I was supposed to do that. Oh, well, that's very interesting. I hadn't. But, I mean, at this point, introductory physics is everybody's first year of physics, whether physics majors or otherwise, is open stuff.
We probably could get that data. I could see about, somebody
We could at
reminds me,
least say
emails
there are
me, I
at
can get
least
a
this many.
textbook report.
Yeah.
Because we could find out
Yeah, at
who's
least-
not using a book.
Exactly.
Then from that, we can pull, because I know like 600 level and special topics often don't. But then from there, we could just poll people who aren't using a book that says no textbook. That's what it says in the system. You could just ask them, is it because you have no textbook or is it because you're using open access? Or your own bundle of notes.
That actually brings up an interesting point. In doing this, it seems like there's opportunities to do this at the introductory level and then in graduate stuff. Whereas in the middle, there are typically pretty good standard reference books that don't go through a lot of editions because they don't sell a lot of copies. They're not for service courses. So they're not big money makers anyway. So it seems like intro graduate, upper division undergraduate books, there's some really standard texts that don't move that much and students would like to have them on their shelves anyway. So it seems to me like that's not really the place to attack. I've had success doing this stuff at very intro service courses and then the more specialized graduate stuff. And I've just left the junior, senior, first year undergraduate stuff, or first year graduate stuff, left it alone.
Plus, it's where you get the most bang for your buck, right? If you did something like this for, say, a History 101, where everybody's going through that course at some point, then that touches everybody versus an upper level that's only going to hit the people in that major.
And somebody who's become a specialist in the field, there are certain texts that you just need to be familiar with. I mean, any physicist needs classical electrodynamics, that specific book. So, and it's old enough, it doesn't sell enough copies to be forced to go through fast editions, so it's been the same for 15 years now. I don't know, that one, only 10 years.
So I'm not sure I had a question, so we'll let that be the last question.
You were talking about the number of classes that don't have a textbook. Do you have a sense for roughly how many that is?
No,
10% or 5% or 1%?
I know we had it from, on SOAR, I had it at one point because it's like all the 492s and 592s, but I think there are more and more, because some people are actually, which is interesting, they're probably, in some courses, there are probably instructors that are using their own set of notes that aren't realizing they could take that and they could put it, they actually bind them, they give them some students, that they could actually make that and put that on our server or something like that. But I can get that, I'll talk to, yeah, I think we that's something we can get from textbook.
It'd be interesting to have the data to report on open source, because again, in a university that buys in, I mean, we have the service learning things, we have a course release to do that, there are ways to leverage resources here too.
That might be interesting to find out, even to say people who aren't using it, are they in that, or are they adding their own notes?
Right.
Because that might be something to say.
Yeah, because I
hey,
would have called mine a textbook, but I always generate my own chunk of whatever, most of it electronic, because you can't get enough copies.
Well, I would absolutely, because you described your Blackboard modules, and the Lumen is who, that's what they give you when you give them your book, is they create a
Oh, that's
Blackboard
cool. Yeah.
module. I mean, that's what it looks like. So
Wow.
yes, it's absolutely.
Cool. then I can keep it outside of Blackboard and see it outside of Blackboard.
Well, just to wrap up, then I will mention that we just opened up our textbook grant program at the beginning of this week. I think we need to rename it the Vera program, because the fact that the three that you laid out are the three tiers that we offer. The first tier being to adopt an existing book, so say an open stacks text. The second being to sort of cobble something together, the Franken book, and then the third tier being to build your own from scratch. So all three of the versions that you've done. But so that application is online. I'll send out the link
He
to
should
that.
get all three.
Yeah, I'd like to
proposals, right?
send 3 up.
You do
Get all
consultant
of
work.
So be sure you sign the sheet, because I'll send out the link to that proposal after the fact. And please take some cookies and water on your way out the door, fill out an evaluation, and let's thank our panelists.